Now that we've seen how it is that language is a multi-generational process and that the assimilation of individuals who are culturally, linguistically, ethnically diverse within this country takes about 4 generations before we really move into an English-only kind of family setting. It's important to understand how it is that these ideas of English only or monolingualism have entrench themselves into our modern day society. And one of the ways that we see that has been through the U.S. involvement in world wars, beginning with World War I. When American GIs went overseas, they fought and they were identified as being Americans because of the way they spoke English. You could tell a Brit who spoke English from an American who spoke English. So Americans really identified with English. And when they came back and settled back in, this was in World War I and in World War II, they began saying, this is a part of the identity we have forged as a country. And so it is something that we move towards. And you begin to see then the kind of extreme manner in which we go to reinforce this identity, where you have a picture here of Uncle Sam saying, I want you to speak English or get out. And it's kind of like we've lost our tolerance for that type of freedom that we used to have, because we're now much more concerned about whether somebody's speaking English rather than worrying about other things that might be equally important. But likewise, you could go online and buy a t-shirt that looks just like this. And you can see that it says there, this is America. We eat bacon, we drink beer. Okay, so far so good. I'm with you there. But we own guns, we speak English, we love freedom. If you don't like it, leave. Oh, so we love freedom as long as it doesn't involve having to speak another language, okay? In which case you can only speak English. So you see a little bit of the hypocrisy there. You see a little bit of the idea that for some reason we must maintain English as part of our identity. And because the U.S. public school system is public, it means that these ideas filter down into our society. States have more recently, but also historically, passed laws to try and mandate English only in some way. Now, states like California, Massachusetts, and Arizona did so a couple of decades ago, but they've rescinded those. Other than Arizona, Arizona is the only state that remains an English-only state where it's illegal to use any language other than English in public schools. But way back when, in 1919, a teacher by the name of Robert Meyer was charged with violating Nebraska state law for doing something that might actually surprise you. You see, he had a child who came fresh off the farm, literally, in Nebraska, entered his one-room schoolhouse and didn't know how to read. But he's 10 years old. He's not a kindergarten student. So the teacher didn't think, well, using a primer with him is actually going to work very well. He thought we need to use something more advanced. But the only book he had that was even advanced and which was in a language that the child understood and spoke was in German, was the Bible. So he said, you know what, I'm going to use that to teach him to read. Now you're thinking, oh, that means then that he was violating the separation of church and state kind of doctrine that we have now, right? No. He actually was charged simply with using a foreign language in the classroom. And the Nebraska State Supreme Court argued this after convicting him, right, and upholding his conviction. They said the legislature had seen the baneful effects of permitting foreigners who had taken residence in this country to rear and educate their children in the language of their native land, which surprises me. I just don't know how it's very unhealthy for you, all right, for me to have had parents who raised me speaking Spanish. I don't think that was a problem for you, but they added here, the result of that condition was found to be inimical to our own safety. And you see the words there? Some kind of threat to your safety because I don't speak English. Fortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that particular state decision, all right? Then, in 1974, U.S. Supreme Court took up the Lau versus Nichols case. I don't know if you're familiar with this one. But basically, this was a group of Chinese-speaking students whose parents brought the lawsuit on their behalf and basically stated that how can our children benefit from the education you're providing them when we send them to school and they don't speak English and you're just teaching them all in English without doing anything to help them understand. Supreme Court made the decision primarily based on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that prohibited discrimination by any agency receiving federal funding as long as that discrimination was systematic and widespread. See, there was a loophole here. Now, here's their ruling, and I credit the justices for really writing some wonderful things here. Look at this. They're saying there's no equality of treatment merely by providing students with same facilities, textbooks, etc. That's the old, Brown versus the Board of Education, separate but equal doctrine, struck down, okay? So they said, for students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. Yes, they are. That is so true. And basic English skills are what schools are supposed to be teaching. So how can you impose this requirement that before a child can really participate in the learning process in school, that they must have acquired those basic skills? When in fact, that's what early academic instruction is supposed to do. Elementary years from kindergarten to 3 are supposed to help you learn English, learn to read, learn to write, and learn to comprehend. So to make children have to do that before they come in, I like the way they put it, makes a mockery of public education. And they add, we know that those who do not understand English are certain to find their classroom experiences wholly incomprehensible and in no way meaningful. Very powerful. Now, it would be great if they just stopped there. Please stop there. But they didn't stop there. They did go on to say, well, you now have to provide a special linguistic program. So that has been defined. The court didn't define it, but the U.S. Department of Ed and U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights and Department of Justice said it basically has to be, at a minimum, when you don't have enough numbers, it has to be English as a second language instruction, okay? Now, they went on and they said, but wait a minute, just so you know, we're only saying this, and we're only finding for the plaintiff, right, Lau in this case, only because we're talking about 1,800 students here. That's a very big number, all right? But if it were one child or a handful, they wouldn't have ruled that way. Basically, they're saying English learners or multilingual learners are not a protected class. You do not have rights on the basis of the fact that you don't speak English. And they added this, and I don't understand why. They added, but you can see their own euphoric recall here, we may only guess as to why they have had no exposure to English in their preschool years. Really? You can only guess as to why my parents, who didn't speak English, hadn't exposed me to English while they were raising me the first 5 years of my life. I think that should be self-evident, shouldn't it? Earlier generations of American ethnic groups have overcome the language barrier by earnest parental endeavor or by the hard fact of being pushed out of the family or community nest and into the realities of broader experience. No. Really? Is this what they think? It'd have been so much better if they just hadn't added that and had just stopped there. I think this does a lot more damage than it does help us in understanding why children have the needs they have, why they struggle the way they do. All right. And so here's the rest of that quote. You can see that it was actually by Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, where he added that if people had wanted to remain immersed in their old culture, they could have done so without coming to America, because bilingualism keeps people actively tied to their old language and habits and maximizes the cost of the transition to becoming American. The only viable alternative to the American underclass is American civilization. Wow, you can see the ethnocentrism just dripping from these words. Without English as a common language, there is no such civilization. Yikes. All right, you get the basic idea here that there are notions within our educational system in which people think that it's perfectly okay to just expect all children to know, understand, speak English, and that they need to do it immediately. And that's where I have a problem. I don't have a problem with kids having to learn English. I have a problem with the manner in which we often try to teach them English and what our expectations are.